Shalom and welcome to podcast number 3 of It Takes a Village to Bring Mashiach. And this podcast is about the Noahide Movement. So let's talk about the Noahide Movement today. I know some of you might not have heard of this before, and that's perfectly fine. And that's why we're here. This is, to me anyway, a fascinating and ethical movement that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it deserves by either the world or by Judaism, as far as I'm concerned. So let's dive in. The Noahide movement, sometimes called the B'nai Noah movement, which literally means children of Noah in Hebrew, is essentially a monotheistic religious movement for non-Jews who want to follow what Judaism considers to be universal moral laws. Now, here's where it gets interesting. These aren't just any laws. According to Jewish tradition, these are the 7 fundamental commandments that God gave to all of humanity through Noah after the flood. Yes, that Noah. The ark, the animals, the whole deal. So, you might be wondering, why Noah? Well, in Jewish thought, Noah is kind of a reset button for humanity. After the flood, God established a covenant not just with the Jewish people, that comes later with Abraham and Moses, but with all of humanity. And this covenant came with 7 basic laws that apply to everyone, regardless of whether you're Jewish or not. So who are the Noahides? In view of the strict monotheism of Islam, Muslims were considered as Noahides, while the status of Christians was a matter of debate. Since the later Middle Ages, however, Christianity too has come to be regarded as Noahide on the ground that Trinitarianism is not forbidden to non-Jews. So let me break down the 7 laws for you. They're really the foundation of everything that I want to talk about today. But I do want to stress, and we'll stress this again, these 7 laws are really akin to the 10 commandments, what you know of as the 10 commandments, all right? So there aren't just 10 laws in Judaism. There are 613, okay? But those are all based on the 10. So that doesn't mean there are only 7 laws for the Noahides. I heard it explained once, and I think it's explained this way in Talmud, that these are the negative commandments, not the positive commandments, and indeed they are expressed negatively. And we'll talk a little bit about what it would be like if they were expressed positively, and how that would bring in so many more, I don't want to say commandments, but so many more ways to do what God wants you to do. Let's put it that way. All right, so the 7 laws of Noah. Number 1, no idolatry. Pretty straightforward. You shall not worship false gods or idols. This is about monotheism. It's about recognizing one God as the creator and sustainer of the universe. But within that idea of idolatry is the recognition of one God, and that's crucial to keep in mind. Number 2 is no blasphemy. So you shall not curse or blaspheme God's name. This is about showing reverence and respect for the divine, but it's also about not speaking badly about anyone made in God's image. 3rd, no murder. Pretty straightforward, right? Sanctity of human life, paramount, but that encompasses a lot more involved in that as well. Number 4, no sexual immorality. This includes the standard prohibitions in Judaism against adultery, incest, other sexual relationships that violate the natural order as understood in Jewish law. And just to be clear, again, that natural order is simply the idea that the purpose of sexual relationships between 2 consenting adults, the purpose is to create a family. So if you have anything but a male and a female consenting adults in coming together in a relationship where sex is involved, the sex is irrelevant. It does not necessarily produce, or it doesn't produce at all, offspring, which is what creates the family. So it's not that it's anti-love, as so many people put it, but it's just pro-family. But it is what it is. It is a commandment of God. Number 5, no theft. Respect for property and the rights of others. Again, don't steal. Pretty straightforward. No eating flesh from a living animal is number 6. This one's a little more complicated. It might seem oddly specific, but it really, when it boils down to the positive side of it, it's about respecting all life, respecting animal life, respecting every possible aspect of God's creation, especially when taking it for food. But it has a much broader concept than that. But the law itself reads, no eating flesh from a living animal. And number 7, establish courts of justice. So this one's kind of different from the others because it's not just a prohibition, and it's in the positive, if you will. It's not a negative commandment. It's a positive commandment to create a just legal system. So we'll deal a little bit with all of this, but really the scope of this podcast is not to spend too much time on the laws, but to just talk about the basics. So what's really interesting here, though, as I mentioned before, that these laws are both simple and profound. They're not asking people to follow the 613 commandments that observant Jews follow. So this isn't about converting to Judaism. It has nothing to do with converting to Judaism. It has everything to do with creating a moral framework of a civilized society. That's the bottom line. However, on the other side of that coin, and this is very important to keep in perspective, yes, the basic moral framework for a civilized society are these 7 laws, but the difference in what Judaism believes and teaches is that the purpose of these 7 laws is not just to create a civilized society, but to create a civilized society that recognizes the one God as creator. So that's a part of it. That's a very important part of it. That's number 1. All right, so these are all just common sense, right? Why do we need a religion connected to it? So here's the catch. It's precisely because these laws are laws that make sense. And this is what I really just said as well. They must be understood and believed to be commanded by someone in authority. You're not going to follow. If I come up to you and say, all right, these are the laws you have to follow, you're going to say, who are you? Why would I follow your laws? So if you agree to follow these laws, you are agreeing, again, that the person who commanded the God who commanded these is in authority, has the authority to make these laws. So the first laws, by way of kind of a demonstration, the first laws we learn are generally from our parents, and we follow them because we believe our parents care for us, love us, and that they have the authority to make these commands. So in order to follow the 7, we have to begin by accepting the first one. This is where the importance of Judaism teaching them comes in. It's our task to show that there's a place where God has communicated his love as well as his authority to humans. This is also the place he has given these laws. So the first thing to understand is, are these laws given in the Torah? Because if they're not, how do we know that God commanded them, right? So let's take a brief look at that. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created. That's the number 1. That establishes God not only as our creator, parent, but also as the one in charge. Genesis chapter 2 then moves on to the first place we practiced idolatry. Okay, so this is actually the third law, is the first law, but within this law is the recognizing of God as creator. So within the first law then, don't commit idolatry. We see that in Genesis chapter 2. Because, again, it's the first place we did it, which is simply saying, what is idolatry? It's simply saying, I'm going to believe someone else more than I believe God, or I'm going to love someone else or rely on someone else more than God. So at this time in the story that we have in the Torah of the Garden of Eden, what man did at that time with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is essentially traded DI for AI. So divine intelligence for artificial intelligence, because that's really what happened. Man did have the ability to distinguish between good and evil. He always really had that ability, but it was God that inspired and directed that intelligence. Whereas now, thanks to the committing of this sin of idolatry, of believing the lies of the serpent, if you will, again, these are all images, then the serpent replaced God as the intelligence. We see that today as well. All right, continuing then in Genesis 2, also at the same time as this the sin of idolatry is happening, we also have combined with that the sin of committing theft. God said, everything else is yours, but this one is not yours. So by taking it, Adam stole it. There was the sin of theft. And because of the punishment now, because again, God is never going to punish, and this is a very important thing to remember, God is never going to punish anyone for laws that they didn't know, for things that they didn't know, things that they haven't been taught. Okay? So obviously, if there was a punishment and Adam and Eve accepted the punishment, they must have recognized that they broke the laws. That's kind of the inference that is made here. Genesis chapter 2, verse 27, then, we're given the positive commandment that implies the negative of not having forbidden sexual relations. The positive commandment is a man leaves his father and mother, clings to his wife, they become one flesh. So that's the positive commandment. After the sin, it says the two of them were naked, Adam and his wife, and they felt no shame. But later, after the sin, they covered themselves because they did feel shame. Again, they knew they broke a commandment. But the commandment here is about there's one way that God has allowed and permitted sexual relationships, and that's between a husband and a wife. And these are more clearly given, again, just to say that they're still in Torah, these are more clearly given as laws in Leviticus 18, in verses 3 and 30. All right, Genesis chapter 3, verse 12 describes the first blasphemy. In one breath, Adam blames both God and Eve for his sin and for his punishment. God uses the word curse for the first time. The first time the word curse appears in the Torah is here, the punishment for the sin of blasphemy. And it teaches us that blasphemy has to do, there's a relationship between blasphemy and cursing. Blasphemy has to do with cursing, or at least in a broader sense, saying something bad about God or man. Remember that both Eve and God were accused here of being the ones responsible. Saying something bad about God or man is forbidden. It wasn't a lie, in a sense. It wasn't a lie. God did give him Eve as a wife, and the wife did, according to the story, was the first one to commit the sin and then perhaps brought Adam into it. Right? So it wasn't a lie. Blasphemy doesn't have to be saying something that isn't true about someone. Even saying something that's true, but in a way that still brings a negative consequence to that statement. That's blasphemy, also called lashon hara, the idea of evil speech. All right, Genesis chapter 4, verse 11, also 9:5, shows us the first murder and the punishment, and we're all familiar probably with the story, and that's where the second time the word curse is used in the idea of murder, which connects it to the idea of blasphemy or loshan hara. Saying something evil about someone is exactly the same in God's eyes as murdering them. And here we very clearly see that connection. Again, Genesis 4:11 and 9:5. 9:5 gives us the punishment. 4:11 is the crime. So murder, again, one of the laws that the whole world is not to do. All of these laws have to do with all mankind, not just Jews, but all mankind, including Jews. So Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, and here we're in the time of Noah. It says not to eat the meat of a live animal. And again, that's the first time that commandment is made known, which is kind of interesting. The rabbis teach that prior to the flood, the world was vegan or vegetarian or however. I'm not sure which exactly it was. Maybe it was both. But at any rate, you were not allowed to eat meat prior to the flood. So we are given that consensus. That's why some people believe that when Messiah returns, and we are in the Messianic age, which is essentially the reopening of the Garden of Eden, that we will once again be vegan, which makes sense. If we're going to get along with the animals, we can't eat them. That seems to be the idea here. All right, and then in chapter Genesis 9, again, the time of Noah, in verse 6, that's when we're given the law to establish laws and courts of justice. Again, it's not said in exactly those words, but we get the inference for that. And then the next question is, what about teaching these laws to others? Was that ever commanded by God? And we can look to Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, and see that indeed it was, again by inference, that we are given the command to teach the laws. So speaking of Abraham, God says, "For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of God by doing what is just and right." Right? So Abraham clearly commanded to teach his children. The broader aspect of that command is that we are commanded to teach those who are our spiritual children as well, those who need to be taught these laws and the idea of monotheism, of the one God. So let's back up a minute. So that's where the laws come from. But how did the idea, what is the background and development of the Noahide movement itself? So the concept of the Noahide laws isn't new, as I've just shown you. It's been part of the Jewish tradition for millennia. You can also find references to these laws in the oral law in the Talmud, particularly in Tractate Sanhedrin. The rabbis of the Talmudic period, roughly between 200 500 CE, discussed these laws extensively as they tried to understand Judaism's relationship with the non-Jewish world. But here's the thing. For most of Jewish history, this remained largely theoretical. Why? Well, for pretty obvious reasons. Jews were often isolated in their own communities, sometimes by choice, but more often by force. They weren't exactly in a position to be promoting a universal ethical system to the broader world. The focus was on Jewish survival and keeping Jewish practice. So the modern Noahide movement, the idea that Judaism was given the commandment to teach this to the world, really took place in the 20th century, particularly after World War II. So there were several factors in play there. Of course, the Holocaust, which forced a lot of people to start thinking about, in deep theological reflection about humanity, about morality, the relationship between Jews and non-Jews. Second, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. That gave Jews a new sense of self-confidence and security. And third, the increasing interfaith dialogue, rather than, dialogue at the point of a gun or a sword, and a growing interest among some non-Jews in Jewish spirituality and ethics. And that interest, by the way, we'll talk about this later, has been around since a lot more than the 20th century. But this is where the Noahide movement it has its beginnings. So before we get too far into the modern movement, let's back up again just a little bit. We need to talk about a figure who absolutely was crucial to laying the intellectual groundwork for all of this, and that was Rabbi Benamozegh, Elijah Benamozegh, who was way ahead of his time. Benamozegh lived from 1822 to 1900. He was an Italian rabbi and a Kabbalist from Livorno, a port city in Tuscany. Livorno was actually a really interesting place for Jews at that time. It had a relatively tolerant atmosphere, and this Jewish community there was quite cosmopolitan, engaged in the broader world. The environment definitely shaped Benamozegh's thinking. So here's what made him so important. He wrote a major work called Israel and Humanity. It was written in French, and this book became absolutely foundational to the modern Noahide movement. The book wasn't actually published until after his death, but when it finally came out, it presented a vision that was really revolutionary for its time. And kind of the sad thing about that is the book is about 300 pages long. Benamozegh wrote, supposedly there are manuscripts from him that this book was taken from, which are over 1,000 pages, 900 to 1,000 pages. So much more there. Be interesting if you could read them. They're all in French. They haven't been translated. This one has been. You can get this book in English. So what was Benamozegh arguing? Well, essentially he was promoting the Noahide laws as a universal religion that could unite, and this is his purpose, to unite all of humanity under monotheism. To unite. I want to stress that word unite because we're going to come back to it. Okay? Teaching Noahidism or the Noahide laws is not about separation. It's not about saying, okay, Gentiles, this one's for you. We, the Jews, have so much more, but you can have this. We'll give you this. It's okay. No, that's not the point. The point is these laws existed long before our Jewish laws existed, and we are just as obligated to fulfill those as any Gentile, as anyone else that was created by God in this world. So, again, this is all about unity, promoting these laws to bring people together, not to separate them. But think about how bold that is, again, in the 19th, 20th, early 19th, or late 19th, early 20th century. That idea, so ahead of its time, that within Judaism is an ethical and spiritual system that's meant for all people, everyone, not just Jews. That this system, the Noahide laws, could serve as a common ground for all of humanity. So here's where it gets really interesting. Benamozegh had a famous student named, and I'll mess up the French part of it probably, but Aimé Bellière. Bellière was a Catholic who became deeply interested in Judaism, and he wanted to convert. Okay, but Benamozegh convinced him not to convert. Interesting. Instead, Benamozegh told him, quote, "You don't need to become Jewish. You can follow the Noahide laws and have a complete spiritual life, a complete relationship with God without converting to Judaism." Was this new to Benamozegh? Did he just pull this out of a hat to say it? No. Judaism has believed this forever, as far as converts were concerned. In order to convert to Judaism, there are things then that you have to accept, but you don't have to convert. The Ger Tzaddik, the God-fearer, also has an equal place. And in fact, there's some place in the Talmud where it also talks about The Gentile who accepts and lives these 7 Noahide laws is equal in status to the high priest. So no, Judaism does not take the idea that Noahides are in any way inferior. They just have the older laws, and we'll talk about this a little later too, whereas Judaism has some other laws added to it for a specific reason. All right? So it wasn't an elitist thing that Benamozegh was promoting. He saw Jews as serving as a kind of priestly people, which is exactly what the Torah commands. And that should be done in a service-oriented way. It's not as, well, look at me, I am the great teacher, I am the great prophet, I am the great Jew. No. A teacher in a school is no different than the students, except that the teacher has had other training, other laws that they had to follow to get to that place. They're no different than the students. The students can then become the teachers. So the Noahide laws, the idea was that Jews have a mission to offer spiritual guidance to all nations, to be a quote-unquote light unto the nations. Where does that come from? That is in the Tanakh. That is a biblical phrase. We are to be a light unto the nations. The Noahide laws were the mechanism for this. They were how Jews could share their ethical monotheism with the world without requiring everyone to become Jewish. Here's something that might surprise you. Benamozegh had this unique view about Christianity. He argued that Christianity was essentially a distorted or oversimplified version of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. It's a pretty controversial claim, and not everyone agrees with it, of course, but it does show that he was trying to understand the relationship between the different religious traditions. He saw Christianity as having taken a certain Kabbalistic idea, or several ideas, but having simplified or misunderstood them, particularly around concepts like the Trinity and the nature of the divine. It was from a misunderstanding and a misreading of the Kabbalah that you can get those ideas from. Okay. Flash forward to the 20th century, we need to talk about Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This man was undoubtedly the single most influential figure in actually getting, well, in Judaism, period, but also in actually getting the modern Noahide movement off the ground as a practical reality. The Rebbe, who led the Chabad Lubavitch movement from 1951 until his death in 1994, made the promotion of the Noahide laws one of his major initiatives. And when I say major, I mean he really put organizational muscle behind it. He encouraged his followers, his army, the Rebbe's army as it's called, and Chabad had followers and emissaries all over the world. He encouraged them and perhaps even commanded them to reach out to non-Jews and to teach them Noahide laws. So you have to ask, why would a Hasidic rabbi care so much about non-Jews following the laws? Who cares? I want you, my army, to follow the laws, but who cares about anyone else? The Rebbe believed that observance of the Noahide laws by non-Jews was essential for bringing about a moral world, and in his theological framework, that and this is expanded on. We will expand on this in a bit, but that will hasten the coming of the Messiah. That's the bottom line for this teaching from the Rebbe and for the Noahide movement in my mind. And that is, if it is done well and done right, it is the Noahide movement that could very easily be the final requirement to bring Mashiach now. The Rebbe saw this as part of the Jewish mission to perfect the world, yes, and what's called tikkun olam in Hebrew, to perfect the world. The Rebbe's influence was so significant in 1991, 3 years before his death, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution, an actual congressional resolution, in the good old days when this kind of thing might happen, where both sides were in agreement, recognizing the 7 Noahide laws as the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization, to quote the resolution, and acknowledging in that resolution the Rebbe's work in promoting these values. Now, this was a largely symbolic resolution. It didn't change anything in America, didn't affect anything. In fact, one of the other movements that the Rebbe had around the same time was almost pleading with the school systems not to take prayer out of school. Again, a Jewish rabbi pleading with the American school system not to take prayer out of school. They didn't listen to him on that, but on this, there was something anyway. So it shows you the kind of reach and influence the movement is starting to have. All right, so again, kind of backing up a little bit, let me tell you about the most fascinating figure in this whole story of the modern Noahide movement, Vendyl Jones. Vendyl Jones, a Baptist minister, he became the father of the Noahide movement. This guy's life reads like something out of a novel and a movie. Seriously. Can you say Indiana Jones, boys and girls? Vendyl Jones? We'll get there. Vendyl Jones was born in 1930 in Texas. He started out as a Southern Baptist minister. So picture this, a Baptist preacher, a Baptist preacher in Texas in the 1950s. That's about as American Christian as you can get, right? But Jones was a serious student of the Bible. And as he studied, he started noticing things that troubled him. In 1956, Jones made a decision that was absolutely shocking for his time and place. He resigned his pastorate. Why? Because he had become deeply disillusioned what he saw as the anti-Jewish elements in Christianity. Now, think about what that means. This is the 1950s, barely a decade after the Holocaust. Jones was looking at Christian theology and Christian history, and he was seeing how Christian anti-Judaism had contributed to centuries of persecution culminating in the Holocaust, and he said, I can't be a part of this anymore. So what did he do? He started studying with rabbis. He immersed himself in, in Jewish texts and Jewish thought, and eventually he became a Noahide. One of the first modern Noahides, in fact. He's often called the father of the modern Noahide movement, and that's not an exaggeration. While Benamozegh laid the intellectual groundwork and the Lubavitcher Rebbe would later provide institutional support, it was Jones who was out there on the ground organizing, teaching, building a community. Jones founded the Institute of Judeo-Christian Research, which later became the Vendyl Jones Research Institute. The goal was to study the Jewish roots of Christianity and to promote understanding of the Noahide laws. He was trying to build bridges to show Christians that they could have a relationship with the God of Israel without the theological baggage that had led to so much anti-Jewish persecution because of what the church taught erroneously and still teaches. In 1967, and this is right after the Six-Day War in Israel, Jones moved to Israel. And here's where the story takes another interesting turn. He became a biblical archaeologist. Now, some of you might be familiar with the character of Indiana Jones and might be familiar with the idea that he was supposedly based on Vendyl Jones. Now, there's no proof of that. and there's some disputation. But definitely there are similarities. Jones spent decades searching for artifacts from the ancient temple in Jerusalem, including the Ark of the Covenant. Unlike Indiana Jones, we don't know that he ever found it. What he did find, though, and this is kind of interesting, he did make some significant discoveries. He found what he believed to be ancient temple incense, something in Hebrew is called ketoret, and the anointing oil. Those two things are going to be very, very important as a find when the temple is returned, because what constitutes the ketoret, what makes up the blending of the incense in the temple, is not something that is known, even though we have all the elements of it given to us in Torah. The way it's blended was kept by one family for many, many centuries. And whether or not that information still exists is unknown, but certainly if you found some of the incense, it would make it so much easier to put that together. And the anointing oil, supposedly, that is the oil that has to be used to anoint the king and or the Mashiach. So those are two very important finds, if they were real. We don't know. It's in dispute. At any rate, it was a big deal in archaeological circles. Whether they were actually authentic is still debated, but the discoveries were significant enough to get serious attention. All right, let's get back to Jones, not as an archaeologist. He was also an organizer and an activist for the Noahide cause. He organized some of the early Noahide conferences, bringing together non-Jews who are interested in following the Noahide laws. He worked tirelessly to get rabbis to study and teach the Noahide laws. Remember, for a long time, most rabbis didn't really think about this. It was theoretical, something in the Talmud, but not really relevant to daily life. Jones was saying, no, this is important. There are non-Jews who want to follow these laws, and we need to provide them with guidance and community, quoting Vendyl Jones. Jones was also active in a really interesting development in 2004. He attempted to revive the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the ancient Jewish court of 71 rabbis that served as the supreme religious authority in ancient Israel. It hadn't existed for about 1,600 years. A group of rabbis in Israel tried to reconstitute it in 2004, and Jones took part in this effort. The idea was that a reconstituted Sanhedrin could provide authoritative rulings on Jewish law, including rulings about the Noahide laws. This effort was controversial, didn't gain universal acceptance, but it does show you how seriously Jones and others were taking the Noahide movement. Now, Jones passed away in 2010. His legacy continues. He showed that it was possible for someone from a Christian background to embrace the Noahide path, and he built much of the infrastructure that the modern Noahide movement relies on today. So, now we've talked about the history and the key figures. Let's get into what Noahides actually believe and practice. What does it mean to be a Noahide in practical terms? First and foremost, Noahides are strict monotheists. They believe in one God, the God of Israel, the creator of the universe. But, and this is important, they don't accept the Christian concept of the Trinity. From a Noahide perspective, God is absolutely one, indivisible, without any partners or divisions. And this is actually one of the main reasons why some Christians become Noahides. They struggle with the Trinitarian theology and find pure monotheism more compelling. Noahides also recognize the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, as Scripture, but they don't accept the New Testament as divinely inspired. They see Jesus as, at most, a Jewish teacher, but not as the Messiah, and certainly not as divine. Now, this is a pretty fundamental break with Christianity, obviously. Now, here's something interesting. Noahides look to Orthodox rabbis for guidance in understanding and applying the Noahide laws. They're not just making it up as they go along. There's a whole body of Jewish legal literature, halakha, that discusses the Noahide laws, and Noahides study this literature, consult with rabbis to understand how to apply the laws in their daily lives. But Noahides are not Jews, and this is really important to understand. They don't observe the Sabbath in the way Jews do. In fact, they're actually not supposed to, according to some traditional Jewish law. They don't keep kosher in the full Jewish sense. They do observe the prohibition against eating flesh from a living animal. They don't celebrate Jewish holidays as a religious obligation, though some may see them as in a limited way, may observe them in a limited way out of respect or interest. So what a Noahide is doing is following what they see as the universal moral law that God gave to all humanity. They see this as their path to God, their way of living a righteous life, and they believe that by following these 7 laws, they can achieve spiritual fulfillment and a place in the world to come, the afterlife, without needing to convert to Judaism. So you might be wondering, how do Noahides actually practice? Well, is there a Noahide church, a synagogue or something? And that's where it gets a little complicated, and that's where things kind of break down, as we'll get into later. The Noahide community is relatively small and geographically dispersed. There's no central organization, no Noahide pope or governing body. What you have instead is a loose network of communities, study groups, and online forums. Many Noahides study independently or in some small groups. Some attend classes at Chabad centers or other Orthodox Jewish institutions that are welcoming to Noahides, but it is the lack of consistent fellowship with Jews and each other that is at the core of the importance of community, because this is not only a problem for Noahides, but many Jews as well who are trying to pull away from, say, Reform Judaism to a more authentic Torah life. Now, the internet has been huge for the Noahide movement. It's also allowed Noahides from all over the world to connect, to share resources, study together. There are websites, YouTube channels, online courses, all of it dedicated to teaching about the Noahide laws, building community, including, of course, Yeshiva B'nai Noach, my YouTube channel. But something much more personal is needed. Something much more personal is needed. And that I cannot stress enough. Some Noahide communities do hold regular gatherings for prayer and study, but these might look somewhat similar to a synagogue service, but with some differences. For example, they might study Torah, but they wouldn't read from a Torah scroll in the ritual way that Jews do. They might pray, but they would use prayers that are right for non-Jews. Again, in my mind, not in theirs, but in my mind, this is a major problem. Okay? And this is where I and the rabbis would have, in many cases, not in all, I've heard some rabbis say similar kinds of things, but this is where I believe the rabbis have let the Noahides down and let everything about the Noahide movement down. We'll get there. So, a discussion of the Noahide movement would be complete without talking about some of the controversies and criticisms, and there are several. First of all, there's criticism from within the Jewish community. Some Jews are uncomfortable with the whole concept. They worry that it's a form of proselytizing, which Judaism traditionally doesn't do. Others worry that it creates a kind of Judaism light that might actually discourage sincere converts who should be converting to Judaism fully. There's also a concern about the theological implications. Does promoting Noahidism mean that Judaism is saying other religions are invalid? That's a very sensitive question. And again, I believe that there are answers to that. From the Christian side, there's obviously resistance from those who see the Noahide movement as a rejection of Christianity. Some Christian critics have even spun conspiracy theories about the Noahide laws, claiming they're part of some plot to impose Jewish law on everyone. These conspiracy theories are, of course, baseless, but they're out there, and they've created some confusion and some tension. There are also practical questions about how the Noahide laws should be interpreted and applied. Remember, these are ancient laws. Applying them to modern situations isn't always straightforward. That's why we have the oral Torah and so many modern commentaries on Jewish law, because things have changed. Is starting a car tantamount to lighting a fire on Shabbat? Okay? Those are the things that even though that doesn't apply to the Noahide movement, but there are things that the Noahides have to struggle with in terms of their commandments, both positive and negative, and understanding how they apply today. So what counts as idolatry in the modern world? How do you apply laws about sexual morality in contemporary society? These are ongoing debates within the Noahide community. And then there's the question of identity, very important one. Noahides are in a kind of liminal space. They're not Jewish, but they're not really part of their former religious communities either. They're following a path that most people have never heard of, that can be isolating. Building a coherent Noahide identity and community is an ongoing challenge. So, where does the Noahide movement stand today? Well, it's still relatively small. Estimates of the number of Noahide worldwide vary widely, a few thousand to maybe even tens of thousands. It's hard to get accurate numbers because there's no formal membership or registration. The movement seems to be growing, though particularly in certain parts of the world. There are Noahide communities in the Philippines, Latin America, parts of Africa, here in the United States, in Europe. The movement, however, here in the United States and Europe is still fairly small, but it is still present. The internet, as we mentioned before, continues to be a major driver of growth for the Noahide movement. People who are questioning their religious beliefs can now easily find information about the Noahide path, but that information, it depends on who you talk to on the internet. There are more resources available than ever before: books, videos, online courses, virtual communities. Some of those books, if you want to find out more, you can go to my class on the Noahides here on Yeshiva B'nai Noach, and I do give you a list of books that are relevant to this discussion. Some Noahide leaders are developing more formal structures, training programs for Noahide teachers, standardized curriculum, organized communities. There's a sense the movement is at a turning point where it could either grow into something more substantial or remain a small niche movement. And the only thing I would add here, and this is about the Noahide movement, so I'm going to throw something out here, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Remember that the purpose of the Noahide movement is to connect non-Jews, to the idea of Judaism, which is the one God, monotheism, and B, to recognize their own worth and value within that system. Now, there's another group that actually is larger than the Noahide movement, who I, in many ways, would lump together in the Noahide movement, especially when I'm talking to rabbis and saying, you need to be reaching out to these groups. And this is, again, not going to be accepted by most rabbis, but I'm going to say it. And that is the Messianic Christian movement, the movements, and I kind of cringe a little bit myself in talking about this, because I'm not really talking about the like Jews for Jesus, although that's a Messianic Christian movement. Definitely the idea of proselytizing within those movements, trying to get Jews to convert, is absolutely beyond the pale of acceptance. But within the Messianic movement, which I have been a part of, is the structure that is so important. And that structure is Christianity is based on Judaism. Jesus and all of the apostles were Jews. They were born Jews. They died Jews. There was no Christianity when the apostles were martyred. If you want to use that term. There was only this sect of Judaism that many people, I think one of the biggest labels for the sect is the Nazarenes, but they had other names as well. But they were not Christians. So anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time there, but that needs to be a part of this movement as well. All right, let me wrap up by talking about the broader theological significance of the movement. So the Noahide movement stands for an attempt to bring about, to articulate a form of ethical monotheism, which is rooted in Jewish tradition. It's saying that you don't have to be Jewish to have a relationship with the God of Israel, but you also need to accept, you also don't need to accept Christian theology. There's another path. From a Jewish perspective, the Noahide movement is a way of engaging with the non-Jewish world without requiring conversion. Never been required. It's a way of saying we have something to offer the world. From a broader religious studies perspective, the Noahide movement is fascinating because it challenges our usual categories. It's not quite a new religion. Indeed, there are definite Jewish teachings that say that it is against Jewish law for any group, any Jewish group, to establish a new religion. We don't need more religions. And this is not really a new religion. It's based on ancient Jewish sources, but it's not exactly Judaism either, and that's the problem. That's where we have to look at to deal with. The movement also raises interesting questions about religious pluralism, about universalism. Can there be universal moral laws that apply to all people? If so, what are they? Who gets to define them? The Noahide movement is offering one answer to these questions, and that answer is rooted in Jewish tradition. God gets to define them. God gets to name them. So why shouldn't the whole world just convert to Judaism? And I want to briefly touch on this, which is a huge topic, much broader than this scope of this podcast. But if Judaism is a religion, then it becomes a standard bearer for the world. It does, and for all kinds of reasons. But the nature of a religion is that its adherents consider it the only true way. That's what Christianity is about. It's the only true way, they say, and therefore there's a need to convert others to it. So if Judaism is a religion, then of course the laws of that religion must apply to the whole world. Must apply. But this is not what we are taught from the Torah. The children of Israel are chosen as teachers, not as a new religion. Judaism was never established as a new religion. It was established, the children of Israel were chosen as a family, as a tribal group, to be teachers and priests and prophets to the world, bringing all mankind, to a right relationship with God through following its laws. That's what Abraham was all about. But that belief in the one God is a part of it. Okay? But that religion, the religion of the one God, is a universal religion. It's not exclusive to Judaism. We don't have our own God. There's only one God. So over and over in the Torah, the Sinai covenant with their 10 laws as a foundation for the 613, they're given as a specific set of laws primarily for the priests and the children of Israel, not for the world. Not for the world. Judaism is not a religion. It's a tribal group whose chosen by God function is to be the teachers and priests to the world. That makes more sense. All of the suffering, all of the training that Judaism has gone through all of these years is to bring us to this one place, to teach us, to be teachers, to teach us, to be priests to the world, not just for ourselves. Our mission is not to ourselves alone. That makes no sense. So if I have a specific function within a group who's part of a larger society, I would certainly recognize that there are rules and regulations about my training that might not be relevant to the larger society. In that sense, I'm part of a chosen group who's chosen to do something particular. That doesn't make me more important. A doctor isn't more important than a lawyer or even a garbage collector. It depends on what your needs are. If you have garbage piling up, you don't need a lawyer, you don't need a doctor, you need a garbage collector. It depends on what your needs are. But each member of society is still liable to society as a whole as well as their own set of rules and laws and teachings. So it's important for me to know both sets of rules. I have to know what society's rules are, and in this case, those are the Noahide laws. And I also have to know what my set of rules are. As a Jew, those are the 613 mitzvahs, commandments. So a religion tends to be more encompassing. So, for instance, as I said, Christianity believes that when Messiah comes, the whole world will be, or at least should be, Christian. Islam is looking forward to a world that's filled with Muslims. That's what religions do. But Judaism actually teaches in the Talmud that after the Messiah comes, get this, this is actually a teaching, that after the Messiah comes, there will still be there will be no converts allowed after the Messiah comes. We'll talk about why in just a minute. But again, Judaism teaches that after the Messiah comes, there will still be Jews and the rest of the world. But we believe that the world will not be filled with other religions. There's only one religion. There will be only one religion. Jews will belong to that religion. I don't have any clue what the name of it is or will be or should be. But we're all going to be part of that one religion, and that one religion is the worship of the one God. Okay? And we will all follow the Noahide laws. So, why should we care what the world believes? Why should Jews care? I've argued before that Judaism, as I said, is not a religion, and this for me is part of the proof. Judaism doesn't teach nor want the whole world to be Jewish. They acknowledge that Judaism is not the religion of the entire world, but rather only of their relatively small group who are joined together by a tribal affiliation, rather than a set of beliefs that everyone has to adhere to. It's my belief, to which I'll talk about more in length in a future podcast, that no one has ever converted. No one has ever converted to Judaism, and no one ever will. Judaism teaches that when the Messiah appears, as I mentioned, the door to Jewish conversion will be closed, so that seems rather harsh if we believe that Jewish teachings matter. But the truth is, I believe that it is further proof that Judaism is not a religion, but a tribal affiliation, a family group chosen to perform a specific task. It's further understood that when Mashiach comes, he will see to it that all Jews are returned to their tribes and their homelands, meaning that there will be no need to convert, meaning that conversion is simply a Jewish soul returning home after all the hidden Jews will be revealed after Messiah comes. So there's no Jew needing to return home. So what will be left for the rest of the world? The Noahide laws, or more appropriately, the Noahide covenant, as distinct from the Mosaic covenant. So a discussion of why we need laws at all. Let's briefly go through this. We're kind of running long here, and I apologize for that. But you know what? I think I will save this for another discussion, all right? So to sum up, the Noahide movement is a small but growing religious movement of non-Jews who follows the 7 laws of Noah as understood in Jewish tradition, has ancient roots, very much a modern phenomenon, shaped by figures like Benamozegh, who provided the framework, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who provided the institutional support, Vendyl Jones, who built the grassroots movement, and showed that the Noahide path was a viable path for people from Christian backgrounds. The movement stands for an attempt to create a universal ethical monotheism that's acceptable to all people without requiring conversion to Judaism. And this is exactly what, and I'm not defending him here because there are many reasons that he doesn't deserve defense. But this is, people argue about how Paul, Shaul, messed up the Nazarene movement, and he did, but his teachings were right on if he was teaching just to Gentiles. Judaism has always said that a Gentile does not have to convert to Judaism and shouldn't convert to Judaism unless that's really what their heart wants to do. Okay? So, this movement, accessible to all people without requiring conversion to Judaism, it's facing the challenges of interpretation, community building, identity formation, same challenges many other groups are facing, many other Jewish groups are facing, but it's also growing and evolving. So whether the Noahide movement will become a major force in the religious landscape or remain a small niche movement remains to be seen. It's definitely something worth paying attention to because it's asking important questions about religious identity, universal ethics, and how different faith traditions can relate to each other in our increasingly interconnected world. But if the Noahide movement, as well as Judaism itself, is to survive, please hear me. If the Noahide movement, as well as Judaism itself, as well as the world, is to survive, it will require the carefully crafted community to support it. And it will require the world to support that community. So stay tuned to find out what that might look like. For this podcast, It Takes a Village to Bring Mashiach, I'm Tom Averna. Thanks for watching. Shalom.